Every fan of 300 remembers the moment. Gerard Butler, standing on a cliff's edge as King Leonidas, kicking a Persian messenger into a bottomless pit and screaming the line that would define his career. It became a meme, a ringtone, a punchline, and a piece of movie history all at once. But what most people watching that scene had no idea about was the sheer physical and mental cost of getting there. Years after the film's release, Butler began opening up in interviews about just how punishing the production really was, and the picture he paints is far darker and far more fascinating than anything audiences saw on screen. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the making of 300, the pain, the sacrifice, the bonds formed, and the transformation that turned a relatively unknown Scottish actor into one of Hollywood's most recognizable leading men. When 300 hit theaters in March 2007, nobody in the industry was fully prepared for what happened next. This was a film built around a comic book most casual moviegoers had never heard of, directed by Zack Snyder, who at the time had only one studio feature under his belt. There were no major A-list stars carrying the marquee, and the story itself was a stylized, almost mythological retelling of the Battle of Thermopylae rather than a conventional historical drama. On paper, it looked like a gamble. That gamble paid off in a massive way. The film opened to roughly $70 million in its first weekend alone, a staggering number for a movie that had been made on a budget of around $60 million total. By the time its theatrical run wound down, 300 had pulled in more than $450 million worldwide, making it one of the most profitable releases of that entire year. Analysts and industry watchers pointed to the film as proof that audiences were hungry for something visually daring, something that broke away from the traditional look and pacing of historical epics. The success didn't stop at the box office. The physiques of the Spartan warriors, chiseled and larger than life, sparked a genuine cultural obsession. Gyms across the country began offering Spartan-themed classes. Personal trainers built entire business models around helping regular people chase the same look the cast had achieved on screen. What started as a movie became, almost overnight, a full-blown fitness movement. But behind that impressive marketing and cultural momentum was a production that pushed its actors to genuinely dangerous extremes, and it would take years before Butler felt comfortable talking about just how bad it got. According to Butler, filming 300 wasn't just physically demanding, it was borderline hazardous on a near-daily basis. He has described a production environment where someone was getting hurt badly enough to need medical attention almost every single day. In his own recollections, he talks about turning around mid-fight sequence to find a castmate down after a prop weapon came too close to his eye, or another actor limping off set with a broken ankle after a fall during a stunt. Because Snyder wanted the fight choreography to feel raw and immediate, many of the actors performed their own stunts rather than relying heavily on stunt doubles. That decision gave the film its visceral, kinetic energy, but it also meant the cast was absorbing real physical punishment take after take. The weapons used on set were blunted for safety, but with the sheer volume of contact involved in the battle sequences, that safety margin only went so far. Cuts, bruises, and torn muscles became a normal part of the daily routine rather than rare exceptions. Adding to the difficulty was the way most of the film was shot. The actors spent countless hours performing intense, full-body combat sequences against blank blue screens, with no real set pieces or environmental cues to react to. They had to imagine the enemies, the terrain, and the chaos of battle purely through performance and physical commitment, all while wearing heavy armor and moving through tightly confined studio spaces. It was in essence both an acting challenge and an athletic one happening simultaneously, and Butler has said the exhaustion by the end of each shooting day was often total, physically and mentally. The transformation into King Leonidas didn't start with a costume fitting. It started nearly 7 months before cameras rolled, inside the training facility known as Jim Jones, under the direction of strength coach Mark Twight. Twight had built a reputation for extreme, no-compromise training methods, and he brought that same intensity to preparing Butler and the rest of the cast for roles that demanded they look like they had spent a lifetime at war. Butler's individual training sessions reportedly stretched up to 6 hours a day, combining heavy strength work, high-intensity circuit training, and hours of sword-fighting drills designed to build both muscle and the specific kind of functional athleticism the fight choreography would require. This wasn't a typical celebrity fitness regimen built around aesthetics alone. Dwight's approach blended traditional strength training with elements of combat conditioning, tire flipping, kettlebell work, obstacle-style circuits, and repetition-heavy bodyweight exercises. The goal wasn't just to look powerful on camera, it was to move like someone who had genuinely trained for battle. Even once filming began, the workouts didn't stop. Cast members continued lifting and training between takes just to maintain the muscular definition the camera demanded. It became a grinding, repetitive cycle. Exhausting days on set followed by continued physical conditioning, with barely any real recovery time built in. The toll on Butler's body was severe. He has spoken about developing tendinitis, hip problems, and a torn rotator cuff during the process, to the point where lifting his arms became genuinely painful. He's admitted that the training nearly broke his body down entirely, and that the physical demands only intensified once filming started layering combat choreography on top of an already brutal conditioning schedule. Despite all of it, he pushed through, driven by a desire to embody Leonidas as authentically as possible rather than simply looking the part. The broader 8-week version of the training program that the rest of the cast followed later became something of a legend in its own right. Fitness communities got hold of the routine, tried to replicate it, and found it nearly impossible to complete in full. It's a rare case of a movie's behind-the-scenes preparation becoming almost as culturally significant as the film itself. For Butler, physical transformation was only part of the equation. He has described going to unusual lengths to mentally and emotionally inhabit the character, including regular meditation sessions where he tried to psychologically connect with the mindset of a king preparing to lead his men into a battle they were destined to lose. It wasn't enough for him to simply perform the role during filming hours. He wanted to carry that mental state with him throughout the entire production. That level of commitment extended into his approach to stunt work. Rather than stepping back and letting doubles handle the riskier sequences, Butler frequently insisted on doing the physical action himself, believing it would translate into a more authentic, more emotionally charged performance. He's since described some of those battle sequences as among the most exhilarating experiences of his career, driven by genuine adrenaline rather than performance alone. That willingness to put himself in physically risky situations wasn't limited to 300. In the years that followed, Butler found himself in several dangerous real-world situations during other productions, including suffering hypothermia while filming on location and living through a frightening incident during an explosive stunt sequence on a different project. Looking back, it's clear that the intensity he brought to Leonidas became something of a pattern throughout his career, a willingness to physically commit to a role well beyond what was strictly necessary. Adding another layer of difficulty to the production was the fact that most of the film's blood and combat gore wasn't practical at all. It was added digitally in post-production. That meant the cast had to fully commit to their reactions and physicality without any of the usual visual or tactile cues that normally help actors sell violent sequences. There were no blood packs, no elaborate prosthetic wounds to react to in real time. Butler and his co-stars essentially had to perform through pure imagination, reacting to violence that wouldn't actually exist until months later in editing. Zack Snyder's ambition for 300 was to recreate Frank Miller's graphic novel almost panel for panel, and achieving that vision required leaning heavily on visual effects. The vast majority of the film's shots relied on digital enhancement, and the production itself never left a studio in Montreal. There were no real cliffs of Thermopylae, no physical throne room. Nearly the entire world of Sparta was built afterward in post-production. That approach gave Snyder complete creative control over lighting, atmosphere, and color grading, which is part of why the film has such a distinct, painterly visual identity. But it came with real costs for the people on set. The intense artificial lighting needed to create that signature high-contrast look generated enormous heat inside the studio. turning the set into an uncomfortably hot environment for actors already wearing heavy armor and performing physically demanding choreography for hours at a time. Butler has said the conditions became so extreme at points that he passed out on set from a combination of dehydration and overexertion. Long hours under punishing heat, combined with the physical toll of the fight sequences, pushed the cast to their limits repeatedly throughout the shoot. It's a detail that rarely comes up when people discuss the film's visual achievements, but it underscores just how much real physical suffering went into creating something that looks, on screen, almost otherworldly. Interestingly, some of the film's most memorable moments weren't even fully scripted. The eerie, fragmented dialogue delivered by the Oracle character was largely improvised on set, contributing to the dreamlike, unsettling tone Snyder was going for. It's a small example of how much of 300's identity was shaped in the moment, on a hot soundstage, far removed from any real Greek landscape. If there's one thing Butler has consistently emphasized when discussing this era of his career, it's the bond that formed among the cast. Actors like Lena Headey, David Wenham, Dominic West, and a then-rising Michael Fassbender weren't just working alongside Butler. They were going through the same brutal training regimen, the same grueling shooting days, and the same physical exhaustion together. That shared suffering created something the film's choreography alone couldn't manufacture: real trust. Butler has described how the cast pushed each other through the hardest parts of training, supported one another through injuries, and developed an almost unspoken understanding of each other by the time filming actually began. That chemistry translated directly onto the screen, giving the Spartan army a sense of genuine unity and loyalty that felt earned rather than performed. Beyond the physical training, the cast also leaned on one another to cope with the isolating nature of blue-screen filmmaking, the unbearable heat of the lighting rigs, and the sheer repetition of the shooting schedule. For actors like Headey and Wenham, whose characters carried some of the film's more emotionally weighted scenes, that off-screen closeness helped ground performance